Well, those are the colors we're going to use to paint the fur of the cows, our hell bovines. The idea is to use gray, a medium gray, to cover all the skin, the fur, but also giving it some tonality. That's the reason because I'm using the British khaki to add to the mixture some kind of green tone instead of using neutral gray. It's always a better option. And now I'm painting the black spots using a all brush and non-linear brush strokes. The idea is to generate random and undefined spots on the cow, and to achieve that, it's a good idea to use an all brush, because an all brush is going to generate irregular spots, irregular shapes. Once we have painted all the spots over the fur, we can start applying highlights to the white parts. So I'm adding, as you see in the wet palette, white and British khaki. The British khaki it's all the time to keep some kind of tonality in the gray, and you will appreciate in the final steps that despite of the fact that we are using some tones on the gray, we are still perceiving it as a white fur or a gray fur, right? So try to apply the different layers of the highlights, keeping part of the previous layer that you have applied, and try to take advantage of the texture that we have to generate in the fur, applying brush strokes with some intention, right? Some direction on the brush strokes instead of applying very smooth brush strokes and glazes. You can use a less diluted paint with a bit less of water, and the brush strokes could be more intentional. I mean, as you see, I'm creating thin lines or spots, or rubbing the tip of the brush over the surface to generate some kind of noise, some kind of texture on the different volumes. So at the end we have an organic feeling in the fur instead of something very polished. You can see the different brush strokes I'm using, looking for texture, for organic feeling, and taking advantage of this process and adding more highlights with through the texture at the same time. This salmon tone is going to be used to add some more luminosity in my highlights, but keeping some tone on it. I can't add all the time British khaki because the British khaki is not very luminous, but the salmon does. So I can use the salmon color to add more luminosity and keep some tonality on the gray, even for the final highlights. As you see, I'm focusing more on this side of the coat because the other one is going to be covered by an ambience light. So it doesn't make sense to waste time highlighting the other side, because at the end you will see that it's going to be covered. So the final highlights has to be applied more carefully controlling better the thin lines that we are creating to generate the texture, as you see, and in very specific areas, especially in the area surrounding the head, because at the end this is the main part of the figure. You don't need to reach pure white to generate a tonality that looks as white. Once we have finished the white parts, we can proceed to paint the black parts. I'm using a bit more of dark sea blue to add the first highlights. And the idea is more or less the same. We will try to apply texture with our brush strokes and luminosity by applying salmon tone or white. Remember that this is a black color, so the highlights never will reach a very high luminosity. Only with this medium gray blue tone that they have applied, we have all the highlights we need. And now it's more a matter of blend a bit more the transitions and keep a very dark shadows in all the parts. I'm going to show you a close-up of this part. You will see how the perimeter of the spots are not sharp, they are irregular, and I paint those perimeters with very thin and short lines to simulate the fur. The final highlights in the black parts are very concentrated in specific areas, like if they were the reflection of the hair. You can also blend the transitions or just make the texture a bit less obvious by glazing over the surface with a medium tone or a medium dark tone. And here in the area of the neck, I'm applying some lines with a quite luminous color to simulate the reflection of this muscle. Now with salmon tone and the wine red, I'm generating some kind of pink tone. Obviously you can take any other pink you have in your painting studio, and I'm going to paint the cow nose in a pink tone. And if you are not happy with the pink tone, as I wasn't, you can take any yellow and create a warmer, more orange looking pink instead of the more reddish one, the more pink one, and cover. You can see a difference. I think this tone fits better, but it's something personal. And I'm using this tone also to paint the others. You will need to apply several layers to cover over the black prime. And once you have the color more or less solid, I'm going to apply 2 layers of different reddish pink tones on the tip of the others, making them more red, more pink, just to add some variation in the tonality of this part and making it more interesting. With a bit of salmon and the previous color, even you can add a bit of white. I'm going to apply the final highlights on those areas in the different wrinkles, or even like if they were bright, because I don't know, the others were humid or just shiny. And with the black that we have used to paint the spots, I'm going to add some new spots on the nose, something very typical on cows. And I'm going to paint the eye. The eye, it's not something that I can explain how to paint it. I can recommend you to not to use pure white to paint the eye. As you see, I have mixed the off-white and the salmon. And then to paint the pupil itself, or the iris, I recommend you to start with a small dot that you are going to enlarge, which is going to be easier than trying to draw the entire shape in a first instance. Now I'm going to paint the ears. This is a similar tonality than the one in the nose, but as you see, it's more saturated and a bit more orange. But at the end, it's going to be similar. And with black and this our previous khaki green, I'm going to paint the horns. Those are dark horns and they are not very important, so my recommendation is to paint them in a dark color instead of in a classic bone color, and apply 1 or 2 highlights, and that's all. In my case, I apply 2 highlights in the tip and in the mid part. And well, we can go for the next step, which is painting the leather parts. As you see, I'm using this mahogany brown, orange brown and ochre. And the idea is to apply a base color using the mahogany plus black. I'm going to cover with this all the leather parts and also the hoofs. And I want to highlight the leather by applying texture, something similar as we did in the fur. So the idea is to apply similar brush strokes. As you see, small lines, dots, patching technique, etc. Accumulating those pigment and layers in the highlighted areas. The more luminous the color, the more concentrated in this case in the right side of the leather parts, as you see. Now it's time to start with the metallic part. So the first one is going to be the silver gray part. My idea is to make a dark steel, not a very reflective steel or the typical chrome steel. So my base color is a very dark sea blue, and over it I'm placing the highlights. As this is a dark metallic metal, we are not going to reach never the white in the reflections. So we are starting with a very dark base color, covering almost everything in the chains, but placing only the first highlight in the areas that are more flat, like the plate on the chest. You can blend in this stage the first highlight that you have applied. It's up to you. You can do it at the end of the process. And after that, it's just a matter of adding more and more highlights in the same area, more and more reduce, creating the bright. To do that, I recommend you to go layer by layer, applying the different highlights, but at the same time outlining all the edges affected by the light, because the highlighting is very important when doing non-metallic. In the halberd, we are going to make something very similar. We place an area of the main bright, which is this curve, and we boost a bit the shadows to make it more contrasted. And then we apply several layers of highlights by adding off-white to the mixture. But as you see, when I reach the mid-tone or a medium luminosity, I use this color constantly to outline the edges. The bright has to be very concentrated in a specific and very reduced area to create this looking of something that brights. The illusion of a spark. Something similar with the golden parts. We are applying a base coat of dark brown and then first highlight with orange brown. This first highlight, as you know, is covering a big part of the dark brown, especially in the areas affected by the light. And then with volcanic yellow and yellow ochre, I continue adding more highlights. The idea is to make the gold looking more yellow than the leather and a bit more saturated. Because this is more or less my mid luminosity, my next layer, my next highlight is going to be applied and also is going to be used to outline the edges. Because as I said, outlining edges is very important in the non-metallics. In golden parts, we are not going to reach white, neither, like if we didn't reach in the gray parts, because golden parts are going to reflect in yellowish tones. So you can use more white in your mix, but never reaching white, or maybe ice yellow, for example, which is at the end, this is a white plus yellow color. In my case, I'm achieving this tonality by mixing in the wet palette, because I have the colors already in the wet palette, so it's faster to me. But as you see, those are final reflections and they are still looking yellow. Only in very specific moments you can apply a very small dot of a spark with white in golden parts. This part is optional, it's up to you, it depends on your taste. In my case, it is like adding some kind of rust in golden parts with a jade color, or you can use turquoise as well and it's going to look very good. Finally, with dark blue or dark brown, you have to apply the dark lining in the different parts to define them better. You can apply a wash, but a wash is something that you are not going to control and is going to stain everything. So I prefer to apply the dark lining manually. Now let's go for the ambience light. To do that, I'm mixing black and violet ink to achieve this dark violet, as you see, very dark violet. And I'm shooting from the side, covering all the side part. Carefully, you have to be careful with that, trying not to stain all the not affected areas by the light. And over this, we are shooting once again, but in this case, white. The idea is to cover all the black part, but keeping a small area of transition between the normal color area and the ambience color area. As you see, I'm pushing the lights, I'm pushing the white in specific areas, in specific shapes, volumes, because now that we are going to apply this contrast red with the brush, the red is going to be more luminous, more saturated in the areas where the white was more intense, and in the darker areas, the red is looking more, less intense, more dark. So it builds the volumes almost with only this first shot with the brush. Now I'm creating a purple tone with contrast paints, mixing red and blue, but if you have purple, you can use this purple. And the idea is to paint the spots that we have painted before in black with the purple over the areas affected by the light, because at the end, the black parts are going to be less reflected than the white parts. So it's a good idea to do that. Then by brush, you can boost some highlights, mixing the red tone with white. And one tip here is to make more reflective the areas that are made from metal. That means that you are going to apply more contrast on those areas, more white to the highlights, and less in the areas that are organic, like the fur. Finally, we have to add a reflection of red in the side of the frontal plate. So I'm applying the white first, and over it, I'm glazing with the contrast paint. And well, we are done. And well, this is how our hell bovine looks. If you have any doubt, put in the comment box in YouTube. Give it a like, and well, hope to see you in future processes. Bye bye.